Hello, everyone. So, welcome to today's session. Today, we are going to be talking about AI governance for senior executives. Now, this is a talk I recently did for, just adjust this, the Isle of Man government as part of the Activate AI scheme. Turned out to be very popular. We actually sold out before we'd even done the first event. Due to that, I decided that we would run this as an online event instead, so that more people can get access to it and more people can see the benefits and start to look at this as part of their process. Now, if you're watching this and you don't know me, my name is Dan Thomas. I run a company called Architect Limited, and I'm also the senior technologist at Lima Logic, which is an AI tech company based here on the Isle of Man. So I get to work directly with Brian and Natalie over there. And yet we help people integrate AI into their business models and into their tech stack. So today we are going to be covering about governance. This was originally a 2-hour talk. I'm going to compress it down to a shorter version for the 1-hour session we're going to do today, so you can still hopefully enjoy some of your lunch times. The QR code you are seeing on your screen, that will let you visit my personal website, where there are links to things like Lima Logic, some of the other things I've written that worked on as well. And that's just a resource for you if you want to take this further or you want to get in touch at all. If you do have any questions from this, do feel free to drop me a DM afterwards. And if you have any questions as well, you can also put them on the LinkedIn post underneath this. And if I don't come to them during the talk, I will try and answer them afterwards. So let's get into it then. In essence, AI, particularly generative AI, has changed the face of business just globally. It has radically changed both the complexity of business and the speed with which we are now expected to react in business. What we are seeing is that companies who are not taking up AI are rapidly falling behind. There are a huge number of advantages to AI, and we're going to cover some of those today. But the challenge really is that AI governance is falling behind in a lot of companies. We're seeing that while I think it's around 70% of people are using AI in their day-to-day business work, the vast majority are saying they've had no training, they don't know how to operate it safely, and they're often doing so under the radar. They're using shadow AI, which they're not informing people about. There's a lot of reasons why people do this in a business, but part of it is the pace of business has changed, the workloads are increasing, and people try to keep up with that. Now, if you're in a business and you start using AI to help you with your job, you are going to see massive improvements in your productivity. What we are seeing a lot, unfortunately, is that senior executives, C-suites and boards are often going for a don't ask, don't tell approach, where they are deliberately ignoring some of these things that are happening because they are seeing the productivity output gains, but they're not acting to it and they're not trying to monitor it or manage it because they don't want to put things in place to slow it down. So business has changed rapidly and the speed of change is increasing quite a lot. When I first started doing the Activate AI talks with the government in Q3 last year, discussions around things like AI automation and agentic AI were more theoretical. We're now seeing these rolling out where you can have an AI agent perform actual actions, plug into your systems and do things for you. So companies that haven't moved with the times are now trying to play catch up with that, and governance really is a key part to it. There's 3 overall goals for today's session. The first is I want you to gain a clarity of the risks around it. And these are both the risks of doing it and of not doing AI. I'm a big fan of risk management. It's something in my work in blockchain and Web3 I've had a large focus on. And it is something that a lot of companies really aren't aware of, and particularly when they bring in third-party vendors to help them use AI and AI automation in particular, they don't have that clarity of the risks around it. And often vendors won't talk to them about that side. If you come to us at Lima Logic, for example, we will break these down for you and discuss it in detail. And when I get to the pillars of AI governance, those are the full things we'll talk to you about. But having them in-house, having that knowledge is key. Next, I want you to gain some confidence in oversight of it. So you know what you need to be looking at and why you need to be looking at it, in essence. The final one is around strategic control. So traditionally, IT services sit within the IT department. AI, and particularly generative AI, can't be just an IT function, and we'll discuss that throughout this. But in essence, you need to have, as an executive in your business, an understanding of the strategic control needed to use AI safely within the business and for everyone to have access to it in the way they need. So before we get started, just a bit of framing so we're all on the same page with what we're talking about. When we refer to AI now, we're not actually referring to what used to be AI. AI isn't a new thing and it's been around a long time, and in essence, it's machine learning. What's happened over the last few years is AI has shifted to this generative AI model, and particularly the communication of it has shifted. I refer to generative AI a bit like the Babel fish, if you're familiar with Hitchhiker's Guide. It's a change in the communication that rather than previously, if you want to talk to a computer, you would learn its language. So you would learn JavaScript, you would learn C++, you would learn these things. Or often you would hire a developer who is a specialist in these, a bit like a translator. They would then talk to the computer for you and translate what was coming back out of it into something you could understand. The shift in generative AI is that this now happens by the computer itself. Instead of us learning its language, it has learned ours, and it can then generate things in terms of text, images, video, media and music, and so on, because it understands what we're saying. This has massively democratized access to computing systems and the power they potentially offer, which is great. It means that you don't have to spend years learning programming languages in order to talk to a computer effectively. The trade-off is the way they communicate tends towards the confidence, tends towards the AI thinks it's always right and will always try and give you the right answer. So there is a lot of fine tuning of what goes into this, and that's where the prompt engineering comes from, that you have to be able to communicate effectively with it to get the right results. The downside to this is that anyone can talk to one of these generative AI tools and get pretty much anything they want out of it, but they won't have the context to understand if that's correct, if it's valid, if their output is going to work the way they want it to. Now, we saw this in marketing a huge amount with people using AI tools to generate their marketing strategies, to generate content for them, to generate images and visuals for social media, and so on. A lot of us who have marketing experience were using it that way as well, but we were tailoring it very heavily to our knowledge and our skills to streamline a process we already have. Now, if you don't have that process, you can't streamline it, and you're just reliant on the tool being 100% right. We're now seeing it with this concept of vibe coding, which is non-developers using AI tools such as V0 and Replit and Cursor to generate code for them and generate solutions. Now, again, as a developer, I do use these tools quite heavily, but I have the contextual understanding of what they can and can't do. There was a great example the other day of someone who had used Cursor with no development experience, and at one point it had deleted their database. So they lost all their information, and they were saying it's the software's fault. Now, my comparison would be, you can give me the best, most expensive hammer in the world, and I am not going to be a builder. If I use that hammer as part of building a house and the house falls over, I can't go, well, this hammer was rubbish. You have to have that understanding of what you're doing to use the tools correctly. And again, this comes into this governance aspect. That are you giving the tools to the right people, giving them the right training to use the tool, and ensuring they have the knowledge to know when to step in themselves, when to apply their own knowledge, and so on in there. A couple of quick stats for you. One of the odd things about working in AI is that a lot of companies won't talk about what they're doing with it. There are a lot of NDAs around, and a lot of companies are doing things behind the scenes with their AI that they don't want to talk about. But we know that these things are happening. So in 2022, 58% of firms in finance were using AI. By 2024, it increased to 72 to 75%. Insurers are the highest with 95% usage. There's a couple of reasons why companies don't want to talk about it, though. The first is there is still a lot of stigma around using AI tools, even though pretty much everyone in every department uses them to some extent already. Again, with marketing, we've all used Grammarly for years. No one thinks anything of it, but that is a basic AI tool. But again, because a lot of people are using the tools without the knowledge and without the experience to know what the output should be like and how it should operate, it's created this stigma around it. The other side to it is a lot of companies are, and this is a global issue, are facing challenges. The global business industry is changing. Companies are losing staff. We've seen a lot here on the Isle of Man recently where companies have either closed or have let go of a large number of staff. Now, if you're in that position and you're considering that, the last thing you want to do from a PR point of view is be saying, yeah, we've just launched a massive AI project, which is saving us so many hours per week or per month and X savings. And even if you let go of staff then for a different reason, the assumption will be it's because you're replacing them with AI. And companies don't want to deal with that side of things. They don't want that negative side. So if you're looking at it in terms of your business and thinking, well, no one else in my industry is doing it, so we're not going to bother yet, chances are they're just not talking about it. And even if it's not an official business policy, and they maybe don't have that governance in place they should have, their staff members are doing it and people are using this already. So big use case for AI and why this talk is more for the executive level. Most people on the boots on the ground are often using it already, but there is a serious use case for senior executives, which is very powerful, but is also the reason you need to make sure this governance is in place well. So this is around this idea of the iceberg of ignorance, that too much information is not passed up the chain of command, too much information is lost during the process. And at the top level, you get a very surface level overview of the information needed to make business decisions, which is ironic because all the information sits beneath you, but you are the one making the decisions. So I've worked with business intelligence before, and it's something we've done in the past. And you get all this data from all the different teams and all departments, and you have to turn it into a single, neat, small, understandable report, which someone at the senior level can understand, because at that level, you're not just dealing with one report and one process, you're dealing with them across the business. The problem is the context is lost, the additional information is lost. Now, if you start using AI tools as part of that process, you can start to handle that data in more intelligent ways. You can start to record the context and have the ability to break down that context and discuss it with the models themselves. So very good use case, but again, if your governance isn't in place, this creates a lot of risk around how you're handling data, what you're doing with it, what the output of the models will be, and how they are influencing you to make decisions. So very good use case. More companies need to be looking at it, but they need to be doing so very carefully. So there's a bit of difference between traditional IT, or quite a major difference between traditional IT and generative AI and AI models. Now, this is one of the reasons that it doesn't just sit within an IT framework. It can't just be you hand it to your head of IT and say, right, we need this implemented, you deal with it all. Traditional IT is very rules bound. It's very structured, it's very predictable. If you go to a SQL database and you put in a query one day, unless the data in that database changes, you will get the same answer the next day. You can always predict what's going to happen and you can have that understanding. AI is very different to that. It dynamically learns, so not just about the data it's got, but how it can interpret that data. And it's this interpretive function that adds a lot of extra benefits, but can create challenges down the line. If any of you watching this have ever used things like ChatGPT or Gemini or these AI tools, you will know that when you put in a prompt one day, you get one answer. If you put in the same prompt 10 minutes later, you will get a completely different answer. And again, that's down to prompt engineering and how narrow you can make it. But AI models are called a non-determinative, and that is you won't get consistency out of them. They're also quite opaque. So by this, again, if you look at a SQL server, if you're talking to a SQL database, you will get the same answer. And you can ask the developer and say, right, what does this script do? How has it done it? Exactly why has it generated this answer? And they will be able to give you that information very easily. With generative AI, they go off into these black boxes that no one fully understands, and we'll discuss this in a couple of minutes. But there's this idea that something is happening, but we aren't fully aware of what or why. Now, as a business, if you're making business decisions based on the output of these, you need to be able to explain them. You need to understand why this is happening. So that's one of the challenges of them. There's also the model uncertainty. Now, if you're building an AI solution for your business or you're having one built, there will be an AI model sat behind that. These can change, these can be tweaked. The way they output data can be tweaked by the company themselves. So if we look at ChatGPT, for instance, they've recently released their ChatGPT 5 model. They've faced a lot of kickback over it, over the way it's changed its language, the way it deals with data and the way it handles inquiries. But they are pushing this to the back-end API as well. So if you're currently talking to a specific model, very soon you will be talking to this 5 model, which handles things in a different way. Now, if you're just using it as an individual and asking it to write social posts or something, yes, it changes the output. Yes, it talks to you slightly differently. It's not a massive issue. If, on the other hand, you have this and it's talking to your user-facing chatbot, so you've got a website, you've got a chatbot sat on there, and this is, again, something we do a lot of with Lima Logic. If that model changes, rather than just being you as an individual facing the change, now all your customers are facing it. And 24/7, 365 availability is great, but if it goes wrong, how do you handle that? How are you monitoring it? How can you make the changes so that you're not losing those benefits? Because these changes can be quite massive. As an example of one recently, and I won't go into exactly the technicalities of why it happened, but X has an AI chatbot called Grok. And recently that had some updates, got access to some new data, and very rapidly started referring to itself as Mecha Hitler. Now, if you're using a model like that and something like that happens on it, is that going to start outputting to your front end? Is that going to start changing the way it interprets the data? Because it's not just saying, yep, we've got X, Y, Z figures. It's saying this is the interpretation of it. And this is something that can change with these models. So there are companies, Viking on the Isle of Man, for example, have their Coney platform, which are more localized models. They handle data differently and there might be more control there. But if you're plugging into one of these large third-party models, you have to know how that can change. And again, this comes down to your governance controls. What are we doing with it? What do we do if it changes? How do we handle that? So there are 5 pillars of AI governance. We're going to break these down in a minute and walk through each one to get an idea of how they operate. But this is normally where I'd start with a governance framework for a company. The first of these is risk. So quite simply, what are the risks of using this, of doing it? How do we handle those? How do we understand them? How well known are the risks? In the case of AI, one of the big risks is what happens if we don't do it. And a lot of companies have been ignoring that risk in favor of the we'll wait and see, we'll do the follower approach. Now, this whole risk management is something I've done a lot of, particularly in Web3. And it's very interesting to see the two sides of the scale, from the we're going to take the risk fully of not doing it until we see how it plays out, to the we're going to just do whatever we can as fast as we can, the move fast and break things approach of putting things in place. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of people at both ends and not a lot in the middle. So we see all the reports of the ones where it goes horribly wrong. There was one a while back of a US car sales dealership where they implemented a chatbot on the front end of their site, and someone managed to get it to sell them a car for $1 and agree that that was a legally binding contract. That sort of thing can happen if A, you're not building the chatbot correctly, and B, you don't have the things in place to prevent it and to sort of manage that risk. Next one is transparency. And again, we'll talk about this in more detail, but in essence, how do you know why the model is making the recommendations? Why is it making the choices it's making? What decisions is it talking about, and why is it doing so? There's a very interesting thing with transparency where people will, I've seen people do this on the front end of certain models, they will ask it for some information, or they will ask it to advise them on a certain topic. It then gives the answer, and it can give very detailed, comprehensive answers. If you're using something like ChatGPT's deep research, it will give you a very detailed answer. Then afterwards, they say, right, explain why you have done this. Now, there's an interesting thing with a lot of these models that when you do it that way, it will give you the answer the first time. When you ask it to explain its answer, it doesn't think like you or I do. If you ask me, for example, as a developer, why have I done an analysis a certain way of this data source, I can tell you exactly the steps I went through and exactly what my output was and exactly why I had that opinion about it, that side of it. If you ask an AI model, it will go back and it will say, here's the question I had at the start, here's the output I get. How could I have got there? What's the likely path I took? So it's not actually looking at what it did, it's looking at what it might have done. And again, it's the way they think is that it's trying to help you and it's trying to answer your question, but it won't necessarily give you the correct information. So baking in transparency into these models is key. Accountability, who is responsible for these choices? Who is responsible for the decisions AI is making? Now, again, this was less of an issue a year ago, but as we moved more to agentic AI, we are moving to the stage where the AI models can go and make decisions and can enact them. So that's very powerful. It's a huge financial gain potentially to you. It's 24/7, 365 staff in effect, digitally managed and taking action on your behalf. But who is accountable for that? And again, if we look at this example I spoke of, the developer using Cursor where it deleted this database, he's saying the software is responsible. I'm saying, no, you're responsible. You gave it that authority. And again, as a one individual person doing it, not a big issue. If you're rolling these tools out to your company, you have to have that governance in place to be able to say, well, actually, if the software does this, then this person is responsible for it. Because there are variations around this. If a user puts in a request, it gives them an answer and they make a decision based on that. You need to have that transparency to understand if the decision's gone wrong, at what point it went wrong. Did they give it incorrect information? Was the data source corrupt somewhere in the way? Was the tool operating correctly, which might be an IT function? And all these aspects of it where you can say, well, actually, this is where it went wrong. So A, we can fix it, which is the priority to ensure it doesn't happen again. But B, we can understand who is actually accountable at each step. This is one of the trickiest ones at the minute because so many people are using the tools but don't have the governance in place. So there isn't that accountability if they know if I make this choice, I am responsible to do this. Legal compliance, huge one, particularly GDPR in the Isle of Man, in Europe as well. There are an awful lot of AI companies not concerned about GDPR. And there are a lot of developers out there using AI tools and selling them to industries who don't have that understanding of why GDPR matters and the implications of it. We are, I suspect, very likely to see some major kickback on that side in coming months. But there's also all the other regulatory compliance you have. Does the tool, if it's a generative AI model, understand what your compliance regulations are? So if you're in Web3, for example, there are financial regulations in the UK around promoting certain cryptocurrencies and promote the way you're allowed to promote them. Does the tool understand that? Does the person who is using the tool understand those? And can they analyze the output based against it. Now, again, this is the sort of thing you build into it and you can bake in, but your governance has to be there first to say, this is why we're going to do it. Because particularly with compliance and GDPR, you do not want it to be that you're turning around getting unlimited personal fines, 10 million euro fines, because you have breached these things. And there are companies out there in AI who I know are in full breach of these, and they are actively selling services to businesses. Now, final one is ethics. Ethics is a very tricky issue. I don't tend to do a lot on ethics in my talks because my role for them is not so much to tell you what your ethics should be, but once you've understand your ethics, and I can help you discuss that and how we break it down, implementing that in the systems. So this is from a TV show called The Good Place, and the entire show is really about ethics, handling ethics and understanding your own ethical frameworks. So a bit of homework, go watch the show if you want. Is a great TV show, has one of the best endings in TV history. But you need to understand your ethics and you need to have them clearly structured because in essence, ethics is always a battle against capitalism. And if you start baking it into your tools, rather than having ethical frameworks which your staff can follow or bypass as they see fit, the tools often will not let you bypass them. Now, again, in generative AI, if you say to an AI tool, this is our ethical framework, there may be another ethical framework which has been fitted in by the company sat behind it. You know, we talk about Grok and OpenAI's ChatGPT and things like that. They have their own ethical frameworks that these tools will apply. You're then adding yours on top of that. So there's a lot around how they implement ethical frameworks, how they apply them, what feedback they give to the users. For example, if you have an advisory AI based on your business data and someone talks to it, is it just going to reject a request which is outside or it thinks is outside the ethical framework? Is it going to come back to them and give them an answer but say, however, this is doesn't necessarily match this framework? Is it going to alert other members of staff about it and ping HR and say, right, this person is trying to do this? These are all the aspects of ethics you need to understand. And you need to decide these internally before you start implementing the tools. Now, we're going to jump into risk because I say ethics side, it could easily be an entire talk on its own. And it's something that really internally you have to work on. Risk is a very interesting topic in AI. Obviously, there's the risk of not doing it. Your competitors are doing it. They then move faster than you, respond quicker, spin up everything faster than you, and they can put you out of business very quickly. But if you do use it, there are quite a few risks as well. One of the big risks is this idea of trusting the AI too much. So again, that responsibility, the governance framework of who is responsible for the decisions the AI takes. Zillow is a great example of this. Now, Zillow weren't using generative AI. They were using machine learning and large data or big data to understand home buying. And they were, in essence, buying houses and reselling them for a profit. The entire housing market started to shift, though, and their AI model wasn't up to date enough. So they started off very confident, it was all working well. And then as the global situation started to shift, the model didn't shift accordingly. They then started to lose money. They were paying way over the amounts for the houses, but no one inside the business either had the authority or the power to step up and say, we need to pause this. We need to step back and say, this model's not correct. Some people undoubtedly went, well, it doesn't matter. The model's been right so far because it had been very successful. So the model's been right so far. We'll just trust the model. And there's two sides to this. It's that human-led approach of the people in the loop who have the knowledge, have that ability to step in and flag if they spot an issue. And does someone have the authority to say, we're going to stop this now, we're going to draw a line under it, we're going to stop and reassess the model, we're going to reassess the solution. In Zillow's case, they didn't. there, and it went very badly wrong for them. So trusting the model is a key risk. There are a couple of other risks, which bias, which gets talked about a lot, and homogenization, which doesn't generally. Bias is obviously a major risk, particularly when it comes to generative AI output. However, models themselves are not inherently biased. They can be trained to be biased, but humans are. And if we're training these on our data, any biases that have been in our data for some time or have built up over decades can then emerge through the model. So if you think of, if you're a company and you've got maybe 40, 50 years worth of data about management processes in the 70s and 80s were very different to how they are now. The makeup of boards, the way we accepted different individuals into those positions is very different. There was an example of an AI model I remember, which was, they were talking about it interviewing and filtering applications for board membership. And it was based on previous successful board members, which is a valid enough model. The problem was all their previous board members had been 50 plus white guys from certain institutions, because that's who they used to hire. So it was looking at those and saying, yes, these are successful, but then in turn, it was automatically rejecting women or black people or Asian people or anything that didn't fit that exact model. And obviously that's an undesirable bias, but how you handle that is you have to manually alter the data and you have to manually alter that bias. So you are introducing separate bias into your system to handle it. There's been incidences of this of the past. For example, I think it was Google Gemini, when it used to do image generation, it would always, and most models started doing this initially, it would do middle-aged white men whenever you did certain requests of, say, businesses and things. So they said, right, well, we need to swing the bias the other way so they are more equal, which is a very good thing to do. They swung it too far the other way, and there was instance where they were putting minorities, women, and so on into these situations where it was not appropriate in the output. And there's a lot of balance that takes place around the bias of models. This really comes down to your data, though, and one of the reasons that having your own personalized data is so key. Now, linked to that idea of using your own business data is this idea of homogenization. This is the risk that if all businesses start using the same models in the same way, and they're just using the out-of-the-box model, all their output is going to be similar yet slightly different. And as a result, they will all start heading down the same paths. Hopefully watching this, you know your USP is key to your business. That ability for you to differentiate yourself from the competition is really key. If you all start acting the same, you lose that. Now, this is one of the things we saw happen with marketing, that marketers or companies without skilled marketers in started pushing out a lot of AI generated content because it was fast, it was cheap, and it was easy. The problem was it all looked very similar. All looks very samey. The text is very similar. The imagery is very similar. Now this is, it's just a skills issue. It's you're not using the model correctly and you don't have the skills to do the output correctly. But as a result, we saw this big thing of everyone thinks they can always spot AI content. Now in marketing, social media, it does affect businesses and it is key, but it was at least it was a very clear example of how this happens. With something like business processes or wider business decisions at the executive level, if you're all taking the same data source and guiding it together, it might not be as obvious until it's too late. So this is a key issue with your own internal data, and why having custom data that only you have access to and custom processes only you have access to becomes really key. And again, from a governance side, understanding this and saying, you know, what are our data sources? What data sources do we allow and not allow becomes a very powerful tool to prevent this homogenization. Just a couple of things you can look at for risk management. Obviously, there's the standard Risk models so we've put the risk loop here of identify, assess, and monitor, for example. There's also the ISO 42001, which is the Artificial Intelligence Management System, ISO, which handles these sort of things very well and gives you a basic framework for how to handle risk with AI models. Now, transparency, the next leg of the governance framework, is a very challenging one for AI. So this is Sam Altman from OpenAI, and he's quoted as saying, "We certainly have not solved interpretability," which means they can't say exactly why OpenAI and the various models in it are making the decisions they are making, why they are advising people the way they are, why they're doing the outputs they are. Hallucination is a prime example of this, when the models try to solve a problem for you and they make up information. There's very famous cases of this. I think it was the New York Times was getting inquiries from journalists saying, and from reporters saying, "We've read this article, it's got a quote here, it sources you, and it's got a very detailed source there, but we can't find that source. Have you got access to it?" And what was happening, the various AI tools at the time were making up sources based on the patterns of how a source should look, rather than actually finding the original source. This is one of the biggest bounties AI companies like OpenAI and Meta are looking at the minute, is how to stop hallucinations. They have improved. There are ways within prompt engineering you can handle this, but there is no clear outcome to it at the minute. And it is a risk, and it is something that you need to look at in terms of the transparency, is being able to go to the model and say, when you give me an answer, explain how you got to that answer, walk me through the steps first, then do the steps. Again, a big focus of a lot of use cases in business for generative AI is about the speed. And when you focus purely on the speed aspect, you end up removing all the other sides to it. And this transparency, how the model is operating, tends to get left by the wayside as an afterthought. And as I said earlier, if you go back to it and ask it to be transparent and explain how it did something, it won't do that. It will just go and try and figure out how it might have done it. So in essence, a lot of AI models are this black box approach. They are, you put information in, something happens inside, and something comes out the other end. I remember back in the end of the 90s when I was at university, one of the guys I lived with was doing computer science, and he was doing modeling of ants in a maze, I think it was. And we were having a conversation one day about this, and he said it's very odd that basically they are writing the code themselves to how to solve this problem to get out of the maze, but we don't know how the code works. We don't know fully why it's doing the things the way it is. It shouldn't necessarily work. It does, and if we change it, it stops working. Now, let's say that was the end of the 90s. We're now 25, 30 years later, and we've been using machine learning and now generative AI to build further machine learning and generative AI tools. So we've stacked these issues on top of each other over time. So there's a lot of uncertainty around how they are making decisions, to the extent that we are using AI to help build hardware. And there are some instances where hardware developers have found that certain pieces of hardware that should be identical, one works better than the other. And there's a lot of these sort of things happening in the back end that the models or the solution providers often won't talk about, but you do need to be aware of. So accountability, this is, say, one of the key ones with any governance framework. Who is accountable for the decisions of it? Unfortunately, this tends to be an IT thing, or it tends to get landed onto IT because it's software, it's computers. We'll give it to IT and they can fix it. With AI and the way it's this non-determinative nature of it, it can't just be an IT solution. In AI's terms, IT is really there to ensure the uptime and the availability, and that it's doing what it should do in the back end technical stack. Is it talking to the right APIs? Is it available when the team need it? If it's switching off, why is it switching off? What are the fail safes in place to turn it off altogether if we need to? That level of it. This governance level becomes about who is accountable when decisions are made, when output comes from it, if someone takes an action from it, or if we go down the agentic route when the AI itself takes an action based on that information. It's a grey area sometimes legally, and I do think we're going to start seeing more clarity emerge around that. And I would be very surprised if it becomes anything other than the people who have either put the prompt in or given it or authorized it to have the access to make the decisions itself. So again, if you're in that senior position and you're looking at these tools thinking, right, we want to build an automation that does X, Y, Z, and then has full control over it itself, you're likely to be the ones accountable for how that operates. If you're looking at using these tools, and one of the key use cases we talk about is this advisory approach of using AI as board members or C-suite, you're then making a decision based on the information it's got. If you make a decision and you take an action as a result of that and it goes wrong, well, the computer told me to do it isn't really going to stand up. So at all stages of this, you have to understand who is accountable for how much of it. And again, this comes from your governance side because you don't want to be trying to fix this after the fact. Now, I'm going to do a quick case study now of a model that was very successful, but how the considerations of this governance framework would fit within it. So Bridgewater, and that's Ray Dalio, who is the founder of it, very famous financial expert, very famous businessman. Now, they trained a model on his approach to business. So they took all his talks, his books, his leadership approaches, and they embedded it within an AI model that anyone in the business could talk to. Very powerful use case. Very good for businesses who have senior teams who are exiting or are looking to bring the wider team up to the same level. Again, it's this idea of democratizing the knowledge and democratizing the access to that knowledge. So great use case, very, very powerful. There are problems around this though. Ray, for example, is not without controversy. His approach to business is not always something people have been happy with. He's likely to have had experiences that are melded via the biases of the time, should we say. He's been in business a long time, and we know a lot of approaches have changed then. In the US particularly, they changed one way, then they changed the other. And I'm not saying any of those approaches are right or wrong, but the fact is those will be inherent biases that come from his approach. So if we look at this in terms of the governance framework, how do we handle those biases? What do we do about them when they come out? Do we counteract them, or do we say, well, this is supposed to be a model of him, so we'll make it as accurate as possible and include his biases in there? When it comes time to make the decisions, again, if the model says one thing and we are not happy with it, do we just go with what the model says? Because in practice, it probably doesn't have the authority. It certainly wouldn't have all his knowledge. It has as much as we can give it. One of the key things with actually generative AI is that it's not trained on people. It's trained on how we communicate and what we've written and what we've said, rather than how we are actually thinking. And if you spent any length of time on the internet, say I'm a bit older, so I was there from the start of it, you will know that people aren't always who they appear to be on the internet. We all portray ourselves differently, we approach things differently, and we put out content that isn't something we'd necessarily do in person. X is a prime example of this. I say I'll be very surprised if the amount of people who show certain racist, homophobic, and so on tendencies would ever walk up to someone random in the street and say those things. But on a social media platform, they feel empowered to do that. Now, if we're taking that data and training it, we're not training the model on the people. We are training it on how they communicate online. So something to be aware of with that. Again, the Bridgewater model was very successful, very powerful. But if you're looking at it from a governance framework and you're considering tools like this, That framework will let you understand where the limitations of the tool are, how you've got to implement it, and what you have to do with it. So we've got a few minutes left. So the first thing I'd like you to do now is think about who is responsible for AI applications in your organization currently. Some companies will say no one is, no one's using AI. But as I already said, around 70% of staff at least are using these tools. Now, they may not be telling you, they may not be discussing it, and they may not be open about it because they know they're not supposed to. But for the time and effort savings it gives them, they are using them. So you need to start with who is going to be responsible overall for AI within the business. Maybe it's a compliance person, maybe it's someone within the IT department, maybe it's one of the C-suite. One of the things I can do is a fractional head of IT type service. A fractional head of AI type service, and that's something that's becoming more popular, where maybe no one in your business has the training and experience of AI because they're too busy doing their normal job to upskill in it, and bringing in someone external to help with that can really level up the company. Same sort of thing if you bring us in as Lima Logic, we will discuss all these sort of aspects with you. And while we're implementing, for example, an automation solution, we kind of act as a de facto in that role, that we will help you work through the challenges of the AI solution. The reason I mention that is because not all companies that are offering AI solutions will do that approach. They will just say, yep, this is the solution, we'll plug it in and we will leave you to figure it out. That's very dangerous with these things, in all honesty. It can very rapidly go sideways and very rapidly cause issues for your company. So having this understanding of who is responsible in your organization for it, what their approach is going to be, what authority they will have. Very similar to when GDPR launched, and we got data protection officers, and we were allocating people within companies to act as that role and act as the ultimate level of control and oversight for that implementation. If you don't have someone in your business, though, who's responsible for AI, you very rapidly need to get them in, and they need to feel. You need to probably do some sort of blanket moratorium where you say to anyone in the business, look, if you're using AI, come talk to us. We can discuss what you're doing and how you're using it. The very last thing you want is to bury your head in the sand. And I say GDPR is the big one I think is going to hit soon, and have people within your business using AI tools, using them in a non-compliant way and just not telling anyone. I personally know of at least one person in the UK who was getting very soundly rewarded for their productivity increases in the business because they were using ChatGPT early on, until one day the head of IT marched them out of the office because they were in massive breach of data protection regulations by using it. But again, they'd had no training on it. They didn't fully understand what they were doing. And these tools are complex. It's not a case of just flick a switch and suddenly you're compliant with X, Y, Z. There's a lot that goes into understanding how they operate and why they do it. And that having that person who can spend the time to focus on that and understand it within your business really is a key function. So around compliance, I've spoken about GDPR a lot. I've been with companies. I was working in tech when GDPR launched in the Isle of Man. It's a key thing. You cannot ignore it. It's such a risky thing to go wrong with. And there are, a lot of companies out there who are trying to ignore it and hope they don't get caught. In the same way, I remember in blockchain and Web3, there's a lot of companies ignoring the SEC, the Securities Enforcement Commission in the US. GDPR applies to you if their citizens are using your software. The SEC had global remit, and there was lots of companies saying, well, it doesn't matter, the SEC won't care about us. We're not US based, who then got caught by it and had fines and was shut down and so on. GDPR is going to be a massive one. Obviously, you've got the FCA guidelines. They are already established, and what we see with any new technological shift is that the first step of it is what guidelines are already in place that can be applied against this new technology. So we're going to see some decisions being made around that space. Court cases and legal results will start happening, and that'll start to form up before we get some more formalized guidelines around a particular tech stack. A lot of existing guidelines tend to be more focused on the end use case rather than technology behind it. They tend to be technology agnostic. So it's something to be aware of. Final big one is the EU AI Act, which is gradually coming into effect. Very clear. Perhaps there's some people who view it as an overreach, particularly compared to, say, the US approach, which is more do whatever you want and we'll let it go. EU is very much a citizen protecting approach. And the AI Act very much focuses around that and delineates what types of AI there are, the risk categories, and what you can and can't do within those categories. Very important to get up to speed in that as it starts to roll out and be implemented. So just in order to wrap up then, hopefully you found this useful, but this is really some strategic recommendations around what I think you should be looking at and where I think any company needs to get started with this. Obviously, the first step, as I said, get yourself someone in the business who is responsible for AI, and they can then start to look at this, understand how it's being used in the business currently, and start to help build up that model of where you go from there. So first one is human in the loop decision making. There's a push from a lot of investors to remove this step. And that's unfortunately the way these things go, that if there are financial gains to be made, capitalism will drive it forward that way. Now, personally, I go very much for a human-led AI enhanced approach, where if I'm using AI tools or I'm helping companies implement them, I go for the how can this make your people better at their job, not how can it replace them approach. There are certain large investors, A17Z, I think is one of them, who are looking for the first $1 billion one-person company or sub 10-person company, who are looking for fully automated companies which have one person who pushes the button at the start and everything happens. We are getting to the stage where that is becoming more plausible, but certainly at the minute for most implementations of AI, you need to have skilled humans there. You need to have the human breakpoints. You need to know what you're going to do and how they're going to stop a process and what that process should look like as an output. So that's really key. Building models and look, if anytime you look at a solution, is where do the humans fit into this? Where are the human controls in it? Next one is data quality and governance. Obviously, we've been talking about governance a lot now. Data quality is something companies don't like to talk about because often it's in a very bad state. I know a couple of people who work with companies just on tidying their data up, and they get paid very well for it. But it's becoming key now that you cannot put bad quality data into an AI model and expect good output. I've seen some solutions where they've attempted just to have a Google Drive, for example, and they just dump all their data in PDFs and text and Excel sheets and whatever else they have and hope the AI can figure it out. And this leads to inconsistencies, this non-determinative nature that means they can't necessarily handle lots of unstructured data that well, particularly at volume. And you need to have that process in place. Say, we're going to have clean data that goes into the model. So whether or not we clean up our existing data or whether or not we're going to build data from scratch, which is cleaner and we know is built that these models can handle it well. Prime example of this, I know a lot of, from the prompt engineering side, a lot of people will have a chat with the tool and go, oh, I'm interested in doing this and this and this. And they put some stuff in, they put a message in. And the tool then has to interpret that and translate it and give them the output based on its interpretation of it. And when I'm doing prompt engineering now, and when I teach prompt engineering, I use JSON structured for pretty much everything. So the tool doesn't have to interpret the data the same way. It's very clear and very sharp as to what it's doing and how it should respond. And it's the same with your company data. The cleaner it is, the less extraneous noise there is to it, the better the tool can handle it and understand it. So it's working from a cleaner data point, a cleaner fixed point to understand. Insist on explainability and transparency. Again, this is one where I've seen third parties come into companies with AI enhanced automations, which is something we do a lot of at Lima. And they'll go in and say, yep, we've built this automation, they plug it in and it does something, but no one in the business knows how it does it. Quite often, unfortunately, the people who are building it don't really know how it does things either. Whereas our approach at Lima is very much, right, we'll break this down for you. You will know exactly what it's doing at every step. And you will understand why it is working this way. And from our side, we then know it very well. And we can justify the fact we can explain what every step is doing. But as a business, you can make that decision. And you can then say, well, actually, I know at this point, this is making decision A. So we want a human in the loop at that point just to validate that decision first. Or we want a human in the loop at the end before it takes the action. As we move more towards agentic AI, and this is going to be very key for companies, you want to know exactly why it's doing things and what it's going to do. So cross-functional AI governance, again, this isn't just a single siloed team solution. You need to roll it out to everyone who's going to be touching the AI tools. And they have such broad uses that at some point, everyone in your business will be, if they aren't already. So having this governance is something that's understandable, is applicable to all the teams, is cross-functional in that way, is really key early on. Because again, we've seen over the last few decades, lots of companies are very siloed in their models within teams. IT doesn't talk to marketing, doesn't talk to product development, and all these sort of things silo off, and it becomes much harder to fix them later on. With AI particularly, the more cross-functional governance you can get embedded to start with, the easier you're going to have the journey. Clear boundaries when not to use AI. So this comes down to your ethics a lot of the time. I know, for example, there are certain HR teams who won't use AI in their hiring and firing. So they've made that decision that they will manually review everything that comes through or anything that comes on the desk about this member of staff has committed this act or whatever it is. They're going to have the people handle that. From a business point of view, it's a slower process. It doesn't take the time. It doesn't have the time-saving benefits of AI. But from an ethical point of view, that's what they've made the decision on. But having that clearly there means that the tools themselves can then stop people doing it. Human intelligence layer around it, again, links to the human in the loop process, but it's not just about knowing what the output is. It's about building the tool so it behaves the way you want based on what the human does and how they behave. So if we look at marketing, for example, if you have a marketing expert in your team who has refined your brand voice and refined your tone, you want them working with the tool during that build stage and during the development stage to ensure it's doing that, because they will have that better understanding of it rather than just saying, here's a rule set they wrote, let's plug that in and hope it does it. Upskilling the team in literacy. This is the big one, actually, that I've seen an awful lot of companies who are rolling out AI and a lot who aren't, where the team members are saying, yep, we've got these tools. Copilot is the common one. They've been given Copilot and it just appears as an option. They have no training on it. They don't understand how it works. And again, this is something we do at Lima quite a lot. We can go into businesses and we can help them upskill team members in it. Personally, I've done it with clients in the past as well, where I've spent a day or a couple of days with them working through how the tool works for their specific role. So upskilling the team is really key, because otherwise it ends up like any software. They look at it, they try it, it doesn't do quite what they want. They don't get the training on how to use it, so they never use it again. And if we look at digital transformation projects that fail, and there's an awful lot of those, something like 70 to 80% are considered failures. That's often the bit that causes it. It's the lack of team training and team buy-in to the product. Final one to get you started is failure modes. What happens if these things switch off? What happens if it falls over? What happens if it starts spouting about being Mecha Hitler? How do you deal with that? And B, how do your teams deal with it for their roles? This is why one of my focuses with AI tools is about process management, that you are replicating a process using AI and you are plugging the AI into certain stages of it, rather than saying, right, the AI is just going to figure it all out itself. Because if that stops working, what's the process your team are going to follow? Do you understand that process, and do they have the skills to do it? OpenAI had an issue very early on, for example, where the interface just started having problems. There was one where they were showing other people's chats to it. This is a tech product. It can fail. And like any system, you need to know how it's going to work or what you're going to do with it when it fails. So just to wrap up then, very quickly, first step. So if you do nothing else, these are the 4 things I would recommend you do, and hopefully you can take away from this hour-long session. First is create an AI register, so you know everything in your business that is using AI. So you've got that proper high-level understanding of what tools you have that are AI-based, what they're doing, and who has access to them. Then you're going to need to map up your risk exposure to it, so you understand what those risks are already in play. Formalize your AI accountability, so who is accountable for the various tools, who is accountable for the outputs of them, and who is accountable for the actions that are taken as a result. Finally, is require that explainability for those tools. So again, this is something that a lot of companies just don't do at the minute. It's look at the tools you have and say, right, how do we explain not how they're being used, but why they are giving the information they have and the decisions we are making from it. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can always contact me through LinkedIn. I'm chronically online, or that QR code there will take you to my link tree. There's various links there. There's one to Lima Logic, so you can go have a look at the stuff we're doing there. There's a few articles I've written in the past as well, and white papers, and there's also, you can get in touch with me through that. So thank you very much for coming along. Hopefully you have found it useful, and I look forward to seeing hopefully more people using AI safely from now on. Thanks very much.